Now, it's been 2 years since people in the Crimean Peninsula were annexed by Russia in the aftermath of a revolution in Ukraine. In 2014, Moscow declared the Republic of Crimea to be an independent, self-governing entity. A referendum followed, and the peninsula's Russian-speaking majority voted to join the Russian Federation. But the referendum was considered illegal by the West and Ukraine and was met by Western sanctions targeting 3 main areas. The first is individuals. 149 Russian nationals are subject to asset freezes and visa bans. There are also economic sanctions, with bans imposed on 5 major banks, 3 energy companies and 3 defense companies. And lastly, there are sanctions on businesses in Crimea, including imports and investment bans. In an exclusive interview with TRT World, the Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, was adamant that Crimea was part of his country.
I believe that I returned the control on the east of my country, and I hope that's possible this year, even. For the Crimea, it take a little bit longer time, but there is no alternative. Crimea would be Ukrainian.
Well, Ulrich Schmid is a professor in Russian and Ukrainian culture and society at the University of St. Gallen. He joins us live from Switzerland. Ulrich, many thanks for joining us. Let me start by asking you, how has life changed for the people in Crimea?
Well, I think the experience is quite mixed. On the one hand, the annexation of the Crimea served the main purpose. Putin's popularity skyrocketed up to 80%, and it's still on that level. On the other hand, in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea is very unpopular. On the international level, of course, there is a problem with the annexation of Crimea, because the West never recognized the annexation of Crimea. And one consequence of this is, for instance, that also the airspace over Ukraine is considered to be Ukrainian airspace, and only Russian planes can land on the peninsula. And every time a Russian plane lands in the airport of Simferopol on Crimea, Ukraine issues a fine.
Well, I mean, it appears that sanctions haven't made a difference. How long do you think they will go on?
Well, I think there is also a rhetoric trap, because the sanctions have explicitly imposed for the annexation of Crimea and for the deliberate destabilization of the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. So in a way, I think the West has tried not to be too explicit about Crimea, because the main goal for the West was to reach a peace agreement for the Donbas. And we can see this in both Minsk peace agreements. There is no mention being made of the Crimea, and probably this was also a wise decision. But for instance, the German diplomat Wolfgang Ischinger, the director of the Munich Security Conference, said that it is an issue that is just suspended. So I think the West will further insist on the return of the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine.
We've now seen Russia's actions in Syria, specifically withdrawal of troops. I wonder how you think that may impact the West's views on how they look at the entire crisis. Well, the partly withdrawal of Russian forces from Syria are a clear signal to the West that the Kremlin wants better relations with the West. And I think the serious economic crisis in Russia, of course, pushes the Kremlin towards a better understanding with the West. And now if the Kremlin will be able to reach a peace agreement for Syria, maybe in their perspective,
perspective, they will also count on a softer relation of the West towards the Crimea.
Okay, Ulrich Schmid, interesting to hear your views. Joining us there from Switzerland. Many thanks.